When we look at a house that's falling apart, we know instantly something likely went wrong in the building process, or perhaps the house has become infested with black mold that's eating away at its structure. We logically apply cause and effect reasoning. However, when it comes to ourselves, when we see we are breaking down, struggling to cope, or feeling bad about ourselves, instead of applying the same logic that something needs to be adjusted or fixed or taken out entirely, we succumb to the should, could, and would, how we think we should feel given our current circumstances, that there can't be a logical reason, a cause and effect, as to why we feel this way. We conclude we are simply the problem invariably. That just isn't true. In order to find out why you struggle to like and love yourself, you need to first figure out why you don't. Without the distorted lens that you and only you are born awful and to blame, but through a careful and precise method and process, because it is a process, one that can last months, of sorting through your rubble, your past, the raw materials that went into making you who you are today and how you feel about yourself. What you need to keep in mind while doing this is not how you think you should feel, but to always refer back to the reality of how you actually feel. A builder looking at a house that has crumbled and fallen down knows, even if this house should have stayed standing, the evidence that something went awry in the building process is the fact that the house is no longer standing. In the same way, you must remember, if you don't feel good about yourself, there are reasons why, and the only way to figure it out, fix and heal, and ensure you don't have the same errors in the rebuilding process, is to excavate at ground zero, to be honest and real and take account of those reasons why, as you discover them in the rubble, without judgment and without the should have, could have, and would haves. Remember, they are not your friends. Let's go back to the beginning, how we define love. My working definition of love is a set of actions that communicate the value and worth of a person or thing to an individual. That means there are some actions that communicate value, worth, and care, while others communicate low value, disregard, and carelessness. How was love, your value, your worth, and deservedness of care communicated to you? One thing you must become enlightened about on this journey of self-love is that no one, absolutely none of us on this earth are born liking or loving themselves. Love is an action, and like any action, we are taught how. Often people confuse a child's healthy self-interest or developmentally appropriate selfishness as evidence of self-worth, which is incorrect. Natural impulses and self-interest in children is instinct and biological imperative. It is not a conscious choice made out of a child's inherent sense of worthiness above others. What does inform a child's sense of self-worth, what communicates to that child whether or not they have worth, value, or deservedness of care, is how the people around them communicate their value, how they love them. And children learn very early on if their value is stable or unstable, unconditional or conditional, if they have value only in certain circumstances or when they meet certain criteria. Some of you already know, can't escape from the reality and knowledge of being let down by those who were supposed to take care of you growing up. Statistically, most of you listening will have had adverse experiences and have gone through at least one or all of the different types of abuse: verbal, emotional, psychological, physical, and sexual, meaning you already know that as a child you were undervalued and mistreated, and may have rightfully and painfully deduced that these traumatic experiences and ways of being treated are why you currently find it difficult to like, love, and trust yourself today. There is another camp of people who also feel badly about themselves, but because they haven't experienced abuse or trauma at the hands of their caretakers, assume there was nothing wrong with their childhood or the way that they were raised, and they are the problem. Denial is a very strong barrier in the minds of people like this. They often think that to critique or be unsatisfied with their upbringing makes them ungrateful, disrespectful, and unloving, which is why it's important that we remember what we are doing here. We are at ground zero and we are excavating. All we know is that our house is broken and we need to figure out why, not for the purpose of blaming anybody, but simply to find out why things fell apart in the first place, to figure out why we don't love ourselves. People often think that holding people in their lives accountable for the negative impact they might have had on their development growing up is nothing short of playing the blame game. They might say, "But I love my parents and I know they loved me." That isn't in question. What is in question is whether or not the way they expressed or didn't express their love taught you how to, or how not to, love yourself. You might be very logically aware that your parents or caretakers loved you and did their best, but did their actions communicate that love and value in a way that your developing self recognized and felt? This often resonates in people who have thought or said the following: "I know my parents loved me, I just never felt it." This gap between what you know and feel can be very confusing and fracturing in someone's life and development. What is important isn't how something should have, could have, or would have made you feel, but the truth of how it truthfully and actually made you feel. That is what informs how you love or don't love yourself. Kohn writes that every year there seems to be a new opinion piece on the right way to parent yourself a good child. But don't mistake new means for new ends. The goal continues to be control. Control is a very insidious and subtle thing. When a person believes they're doing something to someone else or to a child, quote unquote, for their own good, the boundary lines begin to blur. Behaviorism easily breaks away from teaching politeness and right behavior and extends into fostering the parent's ability to control the child's likes and dislikes, the expectation that you should like what your parents like, that you should study what they want you to study, go into a field of work they want you to be qualified in, who you should date and marry, what you should do in your spare time. Kohn references Elizabeth Kagan's research on parenting books. Almost 25 years ago, a social psychologist named Elizabeth Kagan received a bushel of contemporary parenting books and concluded that they mostly reflected a blanket acceptance of parental prerogative, with little serious consideration of a child's needs, feelings, or development. The dominant assumptions, she added, seemed to be that the parent's desires are automatically legitimate, and thus the only question open for discussion was how, exactly, kids could be made to do whatever they're told. Sadly, not much has changed since then. More than 100 parenting books are published in the United States every year, along with countless articles in parenting magazines. Most of them are filled with advice about how to get children to comply with our expectations, how to make them behave, how to train them as though they were pets. This control is secured through conditional parenting. What conditional parenting is, in essence, is using love withdrawal to foster compliance, to create good boys and girls by withholding love and approval and kindness until the behavior or choice the child has made has been corrected. And by corrected, I mean come in alignment with what the parent wants, whether what they want is legitimate or not. And that can cross over into subjective and questionable territory. Love withdrawal tactics hinge on removal, isolation and punishment. When a child misbehaves, it's taught that it's appropriate to remove their personal belongings or sit them on a step or a chair alone, withhold affection and attention until they get back in line. How does a child know their caretaker doesn't like something? Well, that positive attention, love and affection simply isn't available when they're not behaving in a certain way. You might be thinking, well, that's the way the world works. And to that I would say, therein lies the problem. If love is only available when you are pleasant, happy, quiet, pleasing and compliant, where does that leave you the rest of the time? Likely the majority of the time when you're not any of those things. What conditional parenting tactics teaches children is that love that should be there for them unconditionally by their caregivers can and will be taken away from them if they do, act or feel something contrary to what their parents want from them. That being their own person with their own complex feelings and desires isn't tolerated. That love is not available for them when they are angry and upset or frustrated, when they are just being themselves, in all their awkward, frustrating and contradictory childish glory. But love is only available when they are doing things that make others happy. Telling kids to not be upset about things they should absolutely be upset about, that they are rightfully upset about, is a surefire way to raise them to be adults who are emotionally disconnected, unstable, and varying degrees of fucked up. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Wipe that look off your face before I do it for you. Boys don't cry. Don't be a pussy. Girls should be nice. Don't be a bitch. You don't get to tell me no. I'm your mother, father, aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, sister, teacher, carer. You don't have the right to be angry at me. Shut up. No one wants to hear you. All the many ways we are taught not to trust our own experience and self-expression, to second-guess everything, not to trust ourselves. No wonder you can't understand yourself, and we grow up and hate ourselves for it. Do you know how I know that many of you listening, many people worldwide, have been conditionally parented and had to earn their parents' love through certain behaviours and choices? Children of conditional parents become conditional adults, to offer themselves or others compassion, patience, time, and most importantly, acceptance, not behaving or feeling think they should be. An off day and aren't feeling so cheerful, giving themselves the kindness and gentleness, acceptance of how they are feeling. Adults often spend hours berating themselves for feeling negatively, testing themselves for not being positive enough people, at fault. Adults are not able to sit comfortably with their negative emotions. Childhood, quote-unquote, negative feelings were a bad thing. Children with negative emotions or behaviours don't deserve love. Continue on treating themselves like this as adults. Discipline without love might yield short-term compliance. Long-term results are life-altering. Actively life-altering. The sad thing about this is that for many people, it's never had bad intentions, whether that be they were just doing what they were taught was right, popular and recommended parenting advice, or modelling their own parents. As Kohn explains, unfortunately, intentions don't matter. What we feel about our kids isn't as important as how they experience those feelings. They regard the way we treat them. This is the message our kids receive, not the one we think we're sending. Of awkward or upsetting messaging, intentional or unintentional, did you receive about yourself growing up? If you're going to love yourself, you're going to have to connect to the toxic beliefs and systems you grew up in that are in place within your internal processing system now and work on recognizing and undermining them as the obstacles they are. But you can't do that if you don't know what they are or why they're there. How can you challenge a lie that you believe is a truth? First, by discovering it's even there.